Judge mocks teenager in court. Shocked to learn he's a genius attorney in disguise, the courtroom buzzed with a quiet hum of voices as people settled into their seats. It was an ordinary day in Judge Walter Grayson's courtroom, and for most, it was just another case on the docket. The judge himself, a man in his late 50s with a permanent scowl etched into his face, sat high above the room, his presence towering and absolute. He had built a reputation as a no-nonsense man, the kind who enjoyed reminding people of their place. The bailiff cleared his throat and called the next case. The State versus Malik Carter. The murmurs in the courtroom died down as the door to the defendant's holding area swung open. A teenager, no older than 18, stepped forward in handcuffs, flanked by 2 officers. He wasn't dressed in a suit like the lawyers around him. He wasn't even dressed formally. Instead, he wore a plain hoodie and jeans, his sneakers scuffed from years of wear. His face, however, held no fear. He walked with an unshaken calm that made some in the courtroom shift uncomfortably. Judge Grayson's lips curled into a smirk as he scanned the boy before him. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. He leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Tell me, son, do you know where you are?" His voice carried that condescending tone he reserved for cases he thought were a waste of his time. Malik stood still, his dark eyes locked onto the judge's. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm in a court of law." The judge chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, so you do have some common sense. That's good. Now, would you care to explain why a high school dropout is being charged with practicing law without a license? Because that sounds like the dumbest thing I've heard all day." A ripple of laughter passed through the courtroom. The public defenders watching the case exchanged knowing glances. This was going to be an easy one for the judge. Just another foolish kid who thought he was smarter than the system. One of the officers read the charges. "Your Honor, Malik Carter is accused of illegally representing tenants in legal proceedings against various landlords. He has written legal documents, advised plaintiffs, and even negotiated settlements, all without a formal law degree." Judge Grayson rolled his eyes. "So let me get this straight. You've been playing lawyer?" He leaned back, arms crossed. "Tell me, kid, did you watch a few episodes of Law and Order and decide you could take the bar exam?" Another wave of laughter rippled through the courtroom. But Malik didn't flinch. He remained composed, his posture straight. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Malik said, his voice even, "I've never watched Law and Order. But I have read the entire federal and state legal code on property law." Silence fell over the room. For the first time, Judge Grayson's smirk faltered. He squinted at the teenager, as if seeing him properly for the first time. "Excuse me?" Malik lifted his chin. "I've studied property law, Your Honor. Every case I've worked on has been backed by legal precedent. I've never misrepresented myself as a licensed attorney. I've only helped people who couldn't afford legal aid." The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some of the lawyers in the audience sat up a little straighter, now paying attention. Judge Grayson's fingers tapped impatiently against his desk. "That's cute, son. Really. But this is a court of law, not a playground. The law is for real attorneys, not children with Google and too much free time." There was more laughter, but this time, it felt forced. Even the judge seemed aware that something about this wasn't adding up. Just then, the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and a woman in a sleek navy blue suit walked in. She was striking, her presence demanding attention. Some recognized her instantly, Yanelle Hughes, one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the country. She walked with a purpose, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Malik. She gave him the smallest nod before taking a seat in the gallery. Judge Grayson hadn't noticed her yet. He was too busy making a show of his authority. "You think you're clever, boy? Let me tell you something. You might have tricked a few landlords into rolling over, but you're in my courtroom now. And I don't tolerate frauds." Malik didn't react to the insult. Instead, he glanced toward the gallery, where Yanelle now sat. For the first time, a faint smile played on his lips. The judge sighed dramatically. All right, let's get this over with. Before I throw you in a cell for pretending to be something you're not, I'll allow you to defend yourself. Since you clearly think you're smart enough to be a lawyer, let's see what you've got. Malik took a deep breath, stepping forward to the podium. The entire courtroom seemed to lean in, sensing that something was about to shift. He placed his hands on the stand and met the judge's gaze, unwavering. Your Honor, he said smoothly, since the prosecution claims I practice law illegally, I'd like to submit my first motion to dismiss these charges entirely. Judge Grayson raised a brow. On what grounds? Malik smiled slightly. On the grounds that everything I did was legal, and I can prove it. The room fell into stunned silence. And from her seat, Yanelle Hughes smiled. This was going to be interesting. The courtroom's energy shifted the moment Yanelle Hughes spoke. The seasoned defense attorney was well respected, feared, even in legal circles. If she had decided to involve herself in Malik Carter's case, it meant one thing: this was no longer a routine hearing. Judge Grayson's frown deepened, his irritation barely concealed. He tapped his gavel against the bench, restoring order as the whispers in the gallery escalated. Ms. Hughes, he said, his voice measured, I don't see how an amicus curiae brief is relevant in this matter. Mr. Carter is not facing a constitutional challenge or appellate review. Yanelle crossed her arms. Perhaps not. But given the nature of this case and Mr. Carter's ability to cite precedent more effectively than some licensed attorneys I've faced, I believe the court should consider whether the charges against him are even valid. Malik turned his head slightly, studying her. He wasn't sure what to make of her sudden interest in his case. Was she here to help? Or was she another legal professional who saw him as a spectacle rather than a person? Either way, he knew better than to let his guard down. Judge Grayson sighed, clearly unimpressed. Ms. Hughes, you're an observer here. Unless you plan to formally represent Mr. Carter, I suggest you take your seat. Yanelle smirked. Funny you should mention that. She turned to Malik. Would you like legal representation, Mr. Carter? A murmur spread through the courtroom once more. This wasn't just a defense attorney stepping in, this was Yanelle Hughes, one of the most formidable lawyers in the state, offering to stand beside a teenager who had been written off as a joke just minutes ago. Malik hesitated. He had prepared for this battle alone. Every argument, every counterpoint, he had memorized them, knowing full well that no one would be in his corner. Now, someone was offering to fight alongside him. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully, but I've made it this far on my own. Yanelle tilted her head, intrigued. You have? But what if I told you that with the right strategy, we could turn this entire case around, put the system itself on trial? The room fell silent. Malik's fingers curled into fists. He had spent years watching people like Judge Grayson dismiss people like him, people without resources, without connections, without power. He had spent years reading legal textbooks, sitting in on hearings, dissecting every loophole and technicality that allowed the privilege to win while everyone else suffered. And now, Yanelle was telling him he had a chance to do more than just defend himself. He had a chance to expose the system. He met her gaze. I'm listening. Judge Grayson's scowl deepened. Enough of this nonsense, he snapped. The fact remains that this boy... Yanelle raised a hand. Let's clarify something, Your Honor. You keep referring to Mr. Carter as the boy as if that somehow discredits him. Let's be honest, if he were a 25-year-old law school graduate making the same arguments, you wouldn't be nearly as dismissive. Grayson's nostrils flared. Are you accusing me of bias, Ms. Hughes? I'm accusing you of underestimating someone because he doesn't fit your idea of what a legal mind looks like. She turned back to Malik. Tell me something. How did you learn all of this? Malik exhaled slowly. If you are enjoying this video, I would really appreciate it if you could give this video a like. While you are there, click on the subscribe button and also turn on the bell notification to get notified whenever I drop a new video. Alright, let's continue. My mother was evicted when I was 13. The landlord claimed she violated the lease, but she didn't. We couldn't afford a lawyer, so I started reading everything I could about tenant rights. By the time the case was dismissed, I knew more about housing law than half the attorneys we talked to. Yanel smiled. Impressive. Grayson shook his head, clearly unimpressed. A noble story, but this isn't about housing disputes. This is about you overstepping legal boundaries. Yanel's expression hardened. No, Your Honor, this is about something far bigger. It's about a broken system that forces people to fend for themselves while those in power look the other way. She gestured toward Malik. You can charge him if you want, but all you'll be doing is proving his point, that the legal system punishes those who try to fight back. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. Malik, emboldened by Yanel's words, took a step forward. You can charge me, he said, his voice steady, but first, answer this. Why is it illegal for me to help people who can't afford lawyers, but perfectly legal for predatory attorneys to take advantage of those same people? Why is that allowed, but this isn't? Judge Grayson didn't answer. Malik let the silence stretch. You don't have an answer, do you? Grayson slammed his gavel down. Enough. His voice was tight with anger. We will reconvene tomorrow. Court dismissed. As the crowd erupted into frantic murmurs, Yanel leaned toward Malik. This fight isn't over, she whispered. It's just beginning. Malik sat across from Yanel in the small consultation room, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. The courthouse buzzed with activity beyond the walls, but inside, it was just the two of them, an established legal powerhouse and a teenage legal prodigy who had forced an entire courtroom to reconsider everything they thought they knew. You really think we can turn this around? Malik asked, his fingers drumming against the table. His mind raced through the legal precedents he had memorized, but none of them seemed to account for his current situation. Yanel leaned back in her chair, studying him. I don't just think we can, she said. I know we can. Malik narrowed his eyes. Then why are you here? Why are you helping me? Yanel smirked. Because I see something in you. I see someone who refuses to accept the system as it is. You remind me of myself when I first started. Her smirk faded into something more serious. And because I know exactly what Judge Grayson represents. Malik tilted his head. What do you mean? Yanel exhaled. Grayson's record is full of cases where he's dismissed legitimate concerns brought by people like you, people without money, without connections, without the pedigree. He thrives on making people feel powerless. Malik clenched his jaw. He had seen it firsthand, the way Grayson dismissed his arguments not because they were incorrect, but because they came from him. So, Yanel continued, leaning forward, we're going to use his own arrogance against him. Malik raised an eyebrow. How? Yanel pulled out a legal pad and began scribbling. By forcing him into a corner. Right now, he thinks this is just about shutting you down. He doesn't realize he's playing into something much bigger. We're going to make this a public spectacle, one that he can't afford to ignore. Malik frowned. He already sees me as a nuisance. What's stopping him from dismissing everything outright? Yanel tapped her pen against the paper. He wants to humiliate you. That's his weakness. He won't just dismiss this, he'll want to make an example out of you. And that's where we win. Malik nodded slowly. He had spent years studying law, but this? This was strategy. This was the kind of thing he had never learned in textbooks. Yanel slid the notepad across the table. I need you to start preparing your closing argument now. I want you to construct it as if this were a real trial, because in a way, it is. We're not just defending you, or we're putting the system itself on trial. Malik glanced at the pad, then back at her. And what are you going to do? Yanel grinned. I'm going to make sure everyone is watching. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread overnight, social media was buzzing, legal forums were dissecting every detail, and reporters lined the halls, eager for a soundbite. What had started as a routine hearing had transformed into a national conversation about justice, power, and who really had the right to practice law. Judge Grayson stepped into the courtroom, his usual air of superiority intact, but there was something else now, something simmering just beneath the surface. Annoyance. Frustration. Maybe even a hint of concern. Malik sat at the defendant's table, his posture steady, his expression unreadable. Yanel sat beside him, her presence both a shield and a weapon. Grayson wasted no time. We will now proceed with the hearing regarding Mr. Carter's unauthorized legal practice. Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say before we begin? Malik stood. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room, the expectation thick in the air. He took a breath. Yes, Your Honor, he said. I'd like to ask the court a question before we continue. Grayson raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Malik turned to the audience. How many of you have ever needed legal help but couldn't afford a lawyer? A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Several hands hesitantly went up. Malik nodded. How many of you felt like the system was designed against you? More hands. More murmurs. Malik turned back to Grayson. This isn't about whether I broke a rule. This is about why that rule exists in the first place. Who does it really protect? People like me or people like you? The room fell silent. Grayson's face darkened. This is not a political debate, Mr. Carter. This is a legal proceeding. Malik didn't flinch. Then let's talk law. Show me the precedent that says offering legal advice for free is a crime. Show me the statute that says knowledge is restricted to those who can pay for it. Grayson's jaw tightened. That is not the point. Malik took a step forward. No, Your Honor. That's exactly the point. The tension in the courtroom was thick, pressing down like a storm about to break. Malik stood firm, his heartbeat steady despite the weight of every eye on him. Judge Grayson's lips curled into a smirk, his arrogance radiating from the bench like heat from a furnace. So, Grayson said, his voice dripping with condescension, you believe you've outmaneuvered the system, Mr. Carter. You think a few carefully chosen words and some grandstanding will change the law. Malik met his gaze, unwavering. I think the law is meant to serve justice, Your Honor. And justice isn't reserved for those who can afford it. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The reporters in the back furiously scribbled notes, their cameras catching every flicker of emotion on Grayson's face. The judge's fingers drummed against the desk, a slight tick betraying his irritation. Yanel leaned in toward Malik and whispered, he's losing control. Keep pushing. Grayson exhaled sharply, as if bored. You're wasting this court's time. You claim to be well versed in the law? Then you should know that practicing without a license is a criminal offense. Malik nodded. That's true. But I never claimed to be an attorney. I claim to know the law, and last I checked, knowing the law is not a crime. Grayson narrowed his eyes. Providing legal counsel is a crime if you aren't licensed to do so. Malik took a step toward the center of the courtroom, his voice strong. Providing paid legal counsel is regulated. But offering free legal guidance, helping people understand their rights, is protected under the First Amendment. Gasps scattered through the room. The reporters shifted forward in their seats. Yanel smirked. Malik turned, addressing the crowd. The law exists to serve the people. But for too long, it's been twisted to protect power. Tell me, Your Honor, why should a single mother, struggling to keep her home, be unable to defend herself in court simply because she can't afford a lawyer? Grayson's jaw tensed. This is irrelevant to the case. No, Your Honor, Malik countered, his voice rising just slightly. It's entirely relevant. Because that's exactly why I started helping people in the first place. To level the playing field. To make sure that everyone, not just the wealthy, understands their rights. A man in the back stood up suddenly. He's right. The system is rigged. Another voice joined in. We need people like him, not more of these greedy lawyers. The courtroom erupted into hushed chaos. Grayson banged his gavel furiously. Order? I will have order in my courtroom. Malik turned back to him, his expression cool. It's not your courtroom, Your Honor. It belongs to the people. Grayson's face burned red. You are out of line. Malik tilted his head. Then prove me wrong. Show me the law that says I can't teach people about their rights. Show me the law that says knowledge belongs to the privileged few. Silence stretched between them. For the first time, Grayson hesitated. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. The courtroom waited. The reporter's cameras flashed, immortalizing the moment. Yanel spoke then, her voice calm but deliberate. Your Honor, with all due respect, I move to dismiss the charges against my client. The prosecution has failed to demonstrate any actual violation of law. And more importantly, she turned to the audience, her gaze sharp. This court has been presented with an opportunity. An opportunity to correct an injustice. Grayson's fingers gripped the armrests of his chair. His power, his control, was slipping. Malik had turned the tables, had exposed the cracks in the foundation of a system built to suppress voices like his. The judge let out a slow breath, his hands tightening into fists. This court is adjourned, he said through gritted teeth. He banged the gavel harder than necessary and stormed from the bench. The courtroom remained silent for a few moments before bursting into applause. Malik exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. Yanel placed a firm hand on his shoulder. You just changed the game, kid. Malik allowed himself a small smile. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The courtroom had emptied, but the battle was far from over. Malik stood near the courthouse steps, the chill of the late afternoon air wrapping around him like a silent warning. The victory in court was significant, but he knew Judge Grayson would not let it slide. Men like him, powerful, entitled, never admitted defeat. Yanel stood beside him, flipping through her phone. The media's eating this up, she murmured. Social media is on fire. People are calling you a revolutionary. She smirked. Some are calling you the people's lawyer. Malik shook his head. I'm not a lawyer. You might as well be, she said. And that's exactly why Grayson's going to come after you. Malik exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting to the towering courthouse. Let him. As if summoned by his words, a black car pulled up to the curb. The tinted window rolled down, revealing a sharp-dressed man in a navy blue suit. His presence radiated authority. Malik Carter, the man said smoothly, his voice calculated. A word? Yanel stiffened. Who's asking? The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Graham Whitaker. U.S. Attorney's Office. Malik glanced at Yanel before nodding. Go ahead. Whitaker stepped out of the car, his leather shoes clicking against the pavement. You've caused quite a stir. Judge Grayson is, let's say, less than pleased. Malik crossed his arms. And? Whitaker adjusted his cufflinks, his expression unreadable. And there are people who don't like what you're doing. You embarrassed a sitting judge. Exposed cracks in the system. That kind of disruption doesn't go unnoticed. Yanel scoffed. Is that a threat? Whitaker chuckled. It's a warning. You're young, brilliant, and reckless. That's a dangerous combination. Keep pushing, and you might find yourself facing real charges. Malik didn't blink. I know the law, Mr. Whitaker. You can't charge me with anything I haven't done. Whitaker tilted his head, intrigued. True. But the system has ways of making life difficult for people like you. Investigations, audits, character assassination, he gave a lazy shrug. The law isn't always about what's right, Malik. Sometimes, it's about who holds the power. Silence stretched between them. Then Malik smiled, a slow, knowing grin. That's where you and I differ, Mr. Whitaker. You think power comes from status. From titles. But real power? He tapped his temple. Real power is knowledge. And that's something you can't take from me. Whitaker studied him, something flickering in his gaze. Annoyance? Amusement? It was hard to tell. Finally, he sighed. Suit yourself. But don't say you weren't warned. He slid back into the car. Good luck, Mr. Carter. The window rolled up, and the car disappeared down the street. Yanel let out a breath. They're scared of you. Malik turned back to the courthouse, his jaw tightening. They should be. Malik had spent the night thinking about Whitaker's warning. He had heard threats before, but this was different. This wasn't some local attorney trying to intimidate him, this was the system itself, sending a message. They wanted him to stop. But stopping had never been an option. Yanel sat across from him at a diner the next morning, stirring a cup of coffee with slow, deliberate movements. We need a strategy, she said. Grayson and his people are coming for you. It's not a matter of if, it's when. Malik leaned back, exhaling through his nose. They can't arrest me for knowing the law. No, but they can make your life hell, Yanel countered. They can manufacture charges, twist narratives, drag you through court until you don't have the energy or resources to fight back. She paused, lowering her voice. And they don't even have to be the ones to do it. They just need to lean on the right people. Malik's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. He had exposed a corrupt judge on a national stage. Men like Grayson didn't just walk away humiliated, they retaliated. The bell above the diner door jingled. A man in a dark suit entered, scanning the room before locking eyes with Malik. He made his way over, sliding a business card onto the table. Marcus Tillman, he introduced himself, voice smooth and controlled. Civil rights attorney. Yanel frowned. And why are you here? Tillman sat down without asking, folding his hands on the table. Because I've been watching the news. And I know how this goes. The system never lets people like you win. His eyes settled on Malik. Not unless you're prepared for war. Malik picked up the card, studying it. And you're offering to be my general? Tillman smirked. I'm offering you a shield. I've handled cases against corrupt officials before. I know every dirty trick they'll use. If you want to keep fighting, you need protection. Yanel looked skeptical. And what do you get out of this? Tillman chuckled. I get to watch a corrupt judge squirm. And I get to stand beside the kid who's shaking the system. He turned to Malik, his expression sharpening. You have the kind of mind that could change the legal field forever. But not if they break you first. Malik considered his words. He knew he wasn't invincible. He had knowledge, but knowledge alone didn't stop those with power from bending the rules. Maybe it was time to fight smarter. He slid the card into his pocket and extended a hand. Let's talk strategy. Tillman grinned, shaking his hand firmly. Now that's the right move. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back, their cameras poised, ready to capture every moment. The tension in the air was suffocating, but Malik sat calmly at the defense table, his hands folded neatly in front of him. Across the aisle, Judge Grayson sat on the bench, his face an unreadable mask of contempt. Today wasn't just about a trial, this was a reckoning. Marcus Tillman leaned over to Malik. They're going to throw everything at you. Stay sharp. Malik didn't need the reminder. He knew what was coming. The prosecutor, an older man with graying hair, stood and adjusted his tie before addressing the court. Your Honor, we are here today because this young man, Malik Carter, has been engaging in the unauthorized practice of law. He has deceived this court, manipulated the system, and disrespected the sanctity of our legal process. He turned, leveling his gaze at Malik. He is not a lawyer. He is a fraud. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Malik remained still, his expression unreadable. Tillman rose to his feet. Your Honor, my client never misrepresented himself as an attorney. He exercised his constitutional right to defend himself in a court of law, something any citizen is entitled to do. The fact that he did it better than most attorneys in this building is not a crime. The prosecutor scoffed. He exploited a loophole. He performed as an attorney without a license. Malik finally spoke, his voice steady. I used my knowledge to defend the innocent against corruption. I exposed the misconduct of Judge Grayson, a man who you have failed to hold accountable. Grayson's gavel slammed down. You will not disrespect this court, young man. Malik met his gaze, unwavering. This court has already disrespected itself. Gasps filled the room. The judge's face darkened. You're playing a dangerous game. Malik leaned forward. No, you are. And you're losing. Tillman handed a file to the court clerk. Your Honor, we are submitting a formal complaint against Judge Grayson for judicial misconduct. Evidence of case manipulation, bias, and coercion. He turned to the prosecutor. Instead of wasting resources trying to silence my client, maybe the DA's office should focus on the real criminal in this courtroom. The room erupted in murmurs. The prosecutor's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Then the doors burst open. A woman in a crisp black suit strode in, Assistant Attorney General Rebecca Langston. She walked straight to the front, handing a document to the judge. Grayson frowned, scanning the papers. His hands trembled. Langston turned to the court. Effective immediately, Judge Grayson is being placed under investigation. He is hereby removed from presiding over any cases until further notice. Stunned silence. Then applause. Grayson shot to his feet. This is outrageous. Langston cut him off. What's outrageous is that it took a teenager to expose what our system should have caught years ago. She turned to Malik, her expression unreadable. You have a brilliant mind, Mr. Carter. But brilliance without discipline is reckless. Don't waste it. Malik gave a small nod. He wasn't reckless, he was just getting started. As Grayson was escorted out, defeated and humiliated, Malik finally allowed himself a small smile. The system wasn't perfect, but today, justice had won.